Gertie, who was preparing to divorce me for her senior, got into a car accident and fell into a coma. But her soul has been trapped by my side, and I pretend not to see it. The doctor said she might never wake up again. Her senior quickly distanced himself, announcing a new relationship with someone else. Later, when Gertie regained consciousness, he reappeared and, with a tender and affectionate look in his eyes, said, "Gertie, you're finally awake. I've been waiting for you." Chapter 1. I watched Gertie, who was unconscious and covered in various tubes in the ICU, with a cold sense of schadenfreude arising in my heart. You see, this is the retribution that someone who betrays genuine love receives. The doctor said her brain injury was severe, and the chances of her waking up were less than 5%. Upon hearing the news, her boyfriend Stephen came to the hospital, glanced at her with disdain, and coldly said, "I hope you recover soon." After that, he never came back. Perhaps he forgot that it was because of him that Gertie had the accident. 6 months ago, on the day before Gertie was going to divorce me, she received a call from Stephen saying he was drunk and couldn't make it home from a party. Without caring about the torrential rain and strong winds, Gertie drove to pick him up, only to be involved in a series of car accidents. When I arrived at the hospital after receiving the call, I was faced with one thin critical condition notice after another. No one could understand how I felt at that moment, hoping secretly that she would just die, and yet bitterly thinking that death was too easy for her. I didn't know what kind of outcome I wanted. I just wished that she would experience all the pain that I had endured. But now, she lay in the hospital, in a vegetative state, and her beloved Stephen wanted nothing to do with her. In fact, when I coincidentally encountered Stephen at a restaurant, I kindly reminded him. The doctor said that if the person she cares about the most spends more time with her, talks to her, maybe the chances of her waking up will be greater. He smiled dismissively. What does that have to do with me? Why should I waste my prime years on a vegetable who has nothing to do with me? Leon, you're her husband, you should be the one to be with her. Nothing to do with him. I silently repeated those 4 words, feeling the irony in them. He didn't say it had nothing to do with him when he made Gertie leave me, who had a high fever, to celebrate his birthday. He didn't say it had nothing to do with him when he wanted Gertie to divorce me and be with him. But when Gertie became a vegetable because of him and needed his companionship and care, suddenly it had nothing to do with him. I calmly looked at him. Stephen, don't forget, it was because she wanted to come and pick you up from the party that she ended up like this. His face instantly turned red with anger, and he retorted loudly. Did I force her at knife point or with a gun to come and pick me up? It was her own one-sided wish and foolishness to come and get me. Bad luck that she got into an accident and became a useless vegetable. Don't even think about blaming me. I remained silent, quietly watching his hurried departure as if he was avoiding a curse. Of course, Stephen wouldn't be willing to wait for a vegetable who might never wake up again. I tilted my head slightly, and my gaze casually swept over the soul that had been with me for so long. An expression of disbelief, a tightly furrowed brow. She must be feeling terrible right now. Chapter 2. Gertie didn't know that I could see her. It was the second week after the car accident, and I accidentally fell asleep in my study while working. I was awakened by the night breeze blowing in through the open window. In my blurred vision, I saw Gertie leaning sadly next to the wooden bookshelf filled with books, and the white curtains gently brushing past her. My drowsiness instantly vanished. I even forgot to react and stayed half awake, leaning on the desk for a while before I called the hospital. The news I received was, Gertie is doing fine today, there have been no complications, but there are no signs of her waking up either. After calmly hanging up the phone, I blinked and realized that her entire body was slightly transparent. So, I stood up and walked slowly on the soft carpet, pretending not to see anything, reaching out my hand and passing it through her body to take a history of risk investment from the second shelf of the bookcase. As I walked back to my seat with the book, just a few steps away, my emotions underwent a drastic change from shock to surprise and then to calm. Gertie's soul, detached from her body, was trapped by my side. Not only that, but I could also hear her voice. Because when I picked up the divorce agreement she had prepared with the lawyer, I heard her sneer and say, Leon, you must be happy now, right? I'm unconscious and unable to divorce you, just as you wished. She said as I wished. She thought that my persistent pursuit of divorce was unwillingness and stubbornness, but the truth is, I had actually decided to let go of her. Am I happy? No, I'm not. I want to make her unhappy too. So, I let her hear for herself how Stephen distanced himself from her. At the end of the hallway, I heard the nurse's light footsteps, and I silently walked into the ICU, approaching her. I have to admit that even in a hospital gown, with disheveled hair and a pale and sickly complexion lying on the bed, Gertie was still incredibly beautiful. Thick and long eyelashes cast a shadow beneath her eyelids, delicate nostrils framed plump and perfectly proportioned lips, and her oval face, although somewhat thinner due to her coma, still possessed an alluring innocence. But I love Gertie, and being with her was never solely because of her appearance. After all, I understand the principle that the more beautiful something is, the more dangerous it can be. That's why when we first met as bridesmaid and groomsman at the same wedding, I categorized her as a dangerous item. Apart from politely handing her a tissue when she spilled her drink, I didn't have much interaction with her, but fate couldn't be stopped. Soon, we encountered each other for the second time. It happened when I accidentally saved a fainting elderly person in the park while jogging in the evening. It turned out to be Gertie's grandmother. From that moment, as a gesture of gratitude, Gertie invited me to have a meal, and our meetings became more frequent. Getting trapped in the internship building during a rainstorm, I would coincidentally run into Gertie, who would then give me a ride home. During a holiday event that my friends dragged me to attend, it happened to be Gertie's birthday party. Facing the lit candles, she made a wish for a successful love life. Coincidences piled up, and I sensed that something was off. So, I started to deliberately avoid her. But Gertie not only didn't mind my distance, but she also persisted, pushing me into a corner. It was only when I had no other choice but to ask her what she wanted that she smiled with her eyes and asked me in a gentle tone, "Leon, don't you feel that I'm pursuing you? Can't you sense it?" Chapter 3. I don't know why Gertie would like me. But since then, she no longer hides it carefully, but directly launches a fierce attack on me. I resisted her approach and tried to guard my heart. But at that time, Gertie was beautiful, mature, funny, and only caring and gentle towards you. To be honest, for someone who has never been in love with a girl before, it is almost impossible to remain indifferent. Being captivated was just a matter of time. The opportunity to be with her came on Valentine's Day. I had drunk a lot of alcohol at the dinner table in order to close a contract. After it ended and I was about to leave, I accidentally stumbled upon a family dining next door. My dad and his lover, along with their illegitimate child. At first, I didn't pay attention and planned to pretend I hadn't seen them. But that illegitimate child had to speak up loudly. "Bro, didn't you say hi to Dad?" Then his mother chimed in. "Yeah, Leon, your dad really misses you. Let's sit down and have a meal together." I stopped in my tracks, turned around, and looked at that family of three who killed my mother with a sneer. "What? Can you still eat? Aren't you afraid my mother's ghost will come find you tonight?" Perhaps provoked by my words, he immediately stood up and pointed at me. "You bastard. You shut up, I don't have a father like you." Before I could finish my sentence, the woman next to him grabbed a glass of wine and poured it on my face. The next moment, a figure appeared behind me and also poured a glass of wine on her. It was Gertie, who suddenly appeared. She stood in front of me, sneered, and said, "Enjoy your meal, murderers." Then she grabbed my hand and walked out of the restaurant. In the flickering nightlights, Gertie carefully wiped the wine off my face with a tissue, without mentioning the unpleasant incident just now. To be honest, this was the first time in so many years that someone stood in front of me in a protective manner. Couples passed by on the roadside, and I don't know how long had passed before the silent atmosphere was broken. Gertie's tone, as casual as asking if I wanted to have a meal together, she asked me, "Leon, would you like to spend Valentine's Day together?" To this day, I can still recall the tremor of that sprouting seed in my heart at that time. I looked into her sincere eyes and made up my mind. It's her. So, with a smile in my eyes, I looked at her and said, "Sure." She was stunned for a second, then suddenly smiled and took out a chocolate from her bag. She unwrapped it and put one in my mouth, looking at me expectantly. "I made it myself, is it sweet?" I smiled, "Very sweet. It will always be this sweet in the future." At that time, I was too naive, thinking that this future meant forever, until Stephen returned to the country, and I realized that the deadline for this future was before he appeared. After Stephen appeared, all the promises and vows became a joke. I have come across countless answers online about how powerful the allure of unrequited love is, but all the detailed descriptions of those answers pale in comparison to the look Gertie gave Stephen. A cliché story, Stephen is the unattainable love interest for Gertie. After he chose to be with another woman and went abroad, Gertie never forgot about him. And I was just a cannon fodder in her life. Gertie only has one relative, her grandmother. She fainted because of stomach cancer, and the only person she worries about in this lifetime is Gertie, so she hopes to see her get married. I was chosen by Gertie to be the tool to put her grandmother's mind at ease. Chapter 4. But Gertie's grandmother really liked me and treated me well. The love I felt from Gertie was an illusion, but the affection her grandmother showed me was genuine. She would make my favorite osmanthus cake for me, prepare clothes for all seasons in advance, and take my side when Gertie and I had conflicts. Then she would sternly ask Gertie, "What's wrong with Leon? He's doing everything for you. Even before her passing, she said to me, marrying this girl is a sacrifice for you, Leon. As long as you two are happy, I'll be at ease. At that moment, Gertie tightly held my hand with teary eyes and promised, we definitely will. And then, at a gathering 8 months after her grandmother's passing, she reunited with Stephen, who had returned home after their breakup. I realized something was wrong because of a small incident. During dinner together that night, I mentioned the sudden rain and the appearance of a double rainbow in the sky after it, which many people had posted pictures of on their social media. It was said that a double rainbow symbolized good fortune. After I finished speaking, I asked if she had seen it. She didn't answer because she was lost in thought. A few seconds later, she noticed that I had stopped eating and was quietly watching her, so she smiled gently and asked me, Leon, what did you just say? I said it was not important. Back when I was studying, whenever I came across a multiple choice question I didn't know the answer to, I could intuitively and accurately guess the correct answer. I never thought that this skill, which I used to be proud of, would one day be applied to Gertie. It was almost uncontrollable. I guessed that during those few seconds when Gertie was lost in thought, it was because of a man. And I was right, it was Stephen. He was 3 years ahead of Gertie in school, and back then, Gertie wasn't as mature and beautiful as she later became. She was just an ordinary and average college student who couldn't compete with a rich and beautiful girl who also liked Stephen. So, without a doubt, she lost. But she probably didn't expect that one day Stephen would break up with her and return home, while she had already transformed herself successfully. Everything seemed just right, as if the previous separations were only meant for a better reunion in the future. I don't know how much Gertie truly loved Stephen, for him to repeatedly call her away from me without caring about her status as a married woman. Just a casual desire to be with Gertie was enough to ruin my marriage, to ruin me. From initial suspicion, to later questioning, and finally to pleading and hysteria, Gertie pushed me away with disgust. Leon, you're truly disgusting right now. That night, I stood on the balcony all night, tears wetting one cigarette but after another, trying to understand one thing. Gertie was right, I was disgusted with myself too. So I gave up. When Gertie mentioned divorce to me once again, I asked her, in these 4 years together, was there ever a moment when you were sincere? Impatiently avoiding my gaze, she said no. I lowered my head in silence for a few seconds and calmly agreed to the divorce. She seemed somewhat surprised, looking at me cautiously and asking, what trick do you have this time? Yes, several times before, I had used sudden illness or car trouble as excuses to delay the process. The only time I truly wanted to divorce her, she ended up in a coma after a car accident because of Stephen. And then I discovered that Stephen not only abandoned her decisively, but also got back together with his ex. Chapter 5. I heard that the reason Stephen broke up and returned to his home country was because his wealthy and beautiful girlfriend had an ambiguous relationship with his first love. After several arguments between them, they broke up. But as they say, what you can't have, you can't forget, and what you've lost, you regret. So when Stephen contacted Gertie after returning to his home country and started appearing in the same places, getting closer to each other step by step, the wealthy and beautiful girl also came back to find him. It's hard to say if there was any possibility that Stephen was intentionally trying to provoke the wealthy and beautiful girl during his time with Gertie. After all, Gertie used to be her competitor. And during the time when Gertie wanted to divorce me because of Stephen, it was also the craziest time for the wealthy and beautiful girl to regret and try to win him back. She did many romantic and extreme things, apologizing with a drone, sending a ring in a sea of flowers, self-harming after drinking. Stephen watched quietly, continuing to be with Gertie, and then, shortly after she had a car accident and fell into a coma, when the wealthy and beautiful girl once again spent a lot of money to apologize and confess her love, he agreed to reconcile. No one knows what role Gertie played between them, but the wealthy and beautiful girl did visit Gertie in the hospital once and said with relief, although it may be wrong to think this way, I'm grateful for the car accident that night, Gertie. This time, I won again. Gertie was standing behind her at the time, staring at her with a gloomy expression, but unable to do anything because she was in ghost form. From the moment I heard Stephen deny their relationship to witnessing his return and reconciliation, Gertie was initially in disbelief, then became furious, and eventually had to accept everything reluctantly. I calmly and joyfully enjoyed every bit of her pain, watching her silently following me, feeling a sense of mockery. She once wanted to end our relationship so badly, didn't want to see me again, but in the end, she had no choice but to be forced to be with me every day. Just like when we were in love, we shared everything with each other without reservation, letting each other know our every move. Now, she has to accompany me to work, gatherings, shopping, and even plan where to travel. Over time, I started to hear her resentful voice. I'm unconscious, and you still have the mood to go on vacation? Do you even have a heart? Don't you care about my life and death at all? Leon, is it because I've been lying here for too long that you've forgotten that you're already married? Stay away from that woman. The woman she mentioned is Sally, and in turn I brought in. Among all the interns I've had, she is the only one who doesn't address me as director but directly calls me Leon. She is also the most outstanding one in terms of ability among everyone. I actually don't care about how they address me, and besides, Sally's voice is clear and clean. When she calls me Leon, it doesn't make me feel offended. But Gertie doesn't see it that way. Whenever Sally is around me, she shows a side of her that I have never seen before, angrily shouting, "Leon, are you blind? Can't you see that she has ulterior motives?" Upon hearing this, I would look up and glance at Sally, who is sitting quietly and working diligently, not understanding. "Gertie, what are you so worried about?" Chapter 6. Of course, I am no longer an inexperienced young boy, nor am I blind. I can definitely tell what Sally is thinking. She likes me. Sally has the type of appearance that boys nowadays find adorable and charming. In terms of her personality, she knows when to be playful and when to be calm, even more composed than anyone else. Since I've known her, I have rarely seen her lose control of her emotions. Even when a colleague accidentally deleted the hard work she put into a project, she calmly finished her breakfast, then calmly restored it using the quickest method or started over again. After solving the problem, she would say to the apologetic colleague with a face full of concern, "It's all right, just be more careful next time." The only time I saw a panicked expression on her face was when we were discussing a collaborative project together. After it ended, she went to her car while I rested in the room due to a headache from drinking. On the way, we encountered a drunkard who, despite it being his fault, started causing trouble and demanded an apology from me. To be honest, if this had happened right after I graduated, I would have been scared and apologized cautiously. But I'm not that person anymore, so I ignored him, turned around, and at the moment he angrily tried to hit me with a bottle, I firmly grabbed his wrist and restrained him. Due to the excessive force, the bottle he was holding shattered on the ground with a loud bang. When Sally found me, her usually neat dress was slightly stained, but she hadn't noticed. She looked at my hand, which was bleeding from the shards, with irregular breathing, and apologized to me. "I'm sorry, I'm late." I smiled slightly at her. "It's not late, just in time." Later, she bought medicine to dress my wounds and drove me home. On the way, I casually spoke while looking out the window. "Sally, I'm already married." She showed no surprise and casually replied, "Yeah, I know, but I heard you're getting a divorce." These two sentences were the only time we discussed personal matters since we met, and everything we said was factual without crossing any boundaries. So Gertie's anger confused me. I didn't do anything, and she clearly doesn't love me, so why is she angry? But that doesn't matter because her emotions, including herself, will no longer have any impact on me. I continued to maintain a normal working relationship with Sally. Till today, when we went to inspect the setup at the event venue, a scaffold suddenly collapsed. Sally reacted quickly and pushed me away, taking the blow instead. "I'm fine, just a minor scrape on my arm." But Sally has injuries on her side and lower leg from being struck. I accompanied her to the hospital in the ambulance, anxiously waiting for her examination results. When I heard the doctor say that she was okay and just needed rest at home, I received a call from Gertie's attending physician. It was at this moment that I suddenly realized, during our fall, Gertie, who had been anxiously and frantically calling Leon behind me, was nowhere to be found. At the same time, I heard the doctor's voice on the phone. "During the examination of your wife just now, we noticed signs of improvement. She might wake up soon." I held the disconnected phone in my hand for a moment, then went to the ICU and stood in front of Gertie, who was still sleeping with closed eyes, and chuckled mockingly. "With less than a 5% chance, can she really wake up?" Chapter 7. Gertie will not wake up, I don't know, but a month after I left the hospital, I heard another piece of news. Steven broke up again. A long time ago, I saw a saying, "Cheating happens either 0 times or countless times." So, it's not surprising that his rich and beautiful girlfriend, shortly after reconciling with him, got involved with an unknown internet celebrity and wanted to break up with him. What really surprised me was how Steven, who used to leave with style and maintain his aloof and superior image, was now freely and unabashedly cursing and begging in a large shopping mall. I watched from afar, feeling a sense of familiarity. That used to be me. Back then, I clung tightly to Gertie and refused to let go, just like an insane lunatic. The most memorable moment was on my birthday when I saw her sitting happily with Steven at a cafe, discussing their upcoming business trip. In that moment, it felt like a bucket of ice-cold water was poured over me, and my heart was simultaneously engulfed in the searing flames of pain. Without thinking, I rushed over and swept everything off the table in front of them. Gertie immediately stood up and angrily questioned me. Leon, are you out of your mind? Stephen elegantly smiled and looked at Gertie, saying, how could you marry a man like this, Gertie? Completely overwhelmed by emotions, I raised my hand and punched him, saying, or should you marry this homewrecker? Then, without hesitation, Gertie slapped me. The taste of blood and sweetness instantly permeated between my teeth. That night, for the first time, she brought up the idea of divorce, saying, Leon, let's get a divorce. I truly loved Gertie, so even though reason told me to let go, I couldn't bear it emotionally. I didn't want to see them happy either, so I ended up hurting myself badly. And now Stephen is experiencing the pain I went through before. As for why he could easily walk away after the last breakup but made a completely different choice this time, it makes me wonder if his escape route, his confidence, and his tool for provoking the rich and beautiful Gertie have vanished. The drama continues. I stirred my coffee and planned to look away when I unintentionally caught a glimpse of a faint figure in the corner of the crowd, calmly observing the frantic Stephen. It was Gertie. After several days, her spirit appeared again, but this time, she wasn't trapped by my side, and she couldn't get close to me anymore. 3 meters apart, that was the closest position she could approach me. I thought that after gaining her freedom, she wouldn't follow me anymore, but every morning when I left for work, I could see her standing quietly under a ginkgo tree near the entrance of the neighborhood. At the moment she saw me, she would subconsciously walk towards me, only to be dragged back forcefully. Every time, she would walk towards me. Every time, she would be pulled back. I don't know if lonely wandering spirits like her also hope that someone will see them. But one evening, when I came out of a dessert shop, I smiled and looked in her direction. After a brief moment of surprise, she seemed excited and moved her lips, probably calling out Leon. Then, holding a beautifully packaged small cake, I took steps forward, watching her reluctantly step back, till I stopped in the place where she stood. She saw Sally walking towards me, passing through her spectral form. Chapter 8. Sally has been recovering at home ever since the accident. During that time, I visited her once with flowers and fruits, and I covered all the medical expenses and hired a caregiver. She didn't refuse, but when I asked if there was anything else she needed, she looked into my eyes and said, it's my birthday in a month. Now that she has recovered and it happens to be her birthday, I brought the cake to fulfill my promise. To celebrate her birthday. I walked with Sally towards the parking lot, and Gertie probably figured out what we were going to do. Through the crowd of people, she shouted at me, Leon, you can't go. Come back, Leon, come back. Without hesitation, I got into the car and saw Gertie's devastated expression in the rearview mirror. It reminded me of a small incident. Shortly after being together with Gertie, I switched to another company. One evening, I had to work overtime and told Gertie not to wait for me for dinner. After finishing work, my colleague and I were planning to grab a quick late-night snack. But just as I got into the car, Gertie called. Through the phone, her voice carried a faint smile, helplessness, and tenderness. Leon, I've been waiting downstairs for you for 3 hours. Are you just going to leave me like this? In shock, I saw Gertie holding a packed meal through the rearview mirror. I immediately got out of the car and ran towards her, embracing her, and asking, why didn't you call me? Waiting alone here. She affectionately rubbed against my chest and said with a smile, of course, I didn't want to disturb my dear boyfriend at work. Lost in thought, Gertie's faint figure in the rearview mirror grew smaller until it became a black dot. I heard Sally asking me, what are you looking at? I jokingly replied, just watching a joke. 15 minutes later, we arrived at the reserved restaurant. Although it was her birthday, Sally ordered food according to my taste. I discreetly shifted my gaze to the cake, opened the packaging, and instantly a sweet orange scent filled the air. After lighting the candles, I held up the cake and congratulated her with a smile. Happy birthday, Sally. Make a wish. The soft and dim lighting of the restaurant, flickering candles, made it difficult to see her face clearly. But I knew she was looking at me earnestly before closing her eyes to make a wish. I hope I won't be late anymore. I couldn't help but laugh, putting down the cake and raising my glass to toast her. Then I wish your wish comes true. Later, after a few drinks, we took a stroll along the riverbank. The river water reflected the dazzling lights. I silently watched for a while, then sighed, bringing up personal matters with Sally for the second time. I honestly told her, Sally, even though I'm getting a divorce, you know that she's in a coma after the accident. The night breeze gently blew her bangs on her forehead. She didn't seem to care about the implications of my words. Casually leaning her forearm on the railing by the shore, she turned her head to look at me and spoke frankly, divorce and widowhood, they both have consequences. Just as she finished speaking, I was astonished to see Gertie's figure not far away. I wondered if the evening breeze carried those words to her ears. As my peripheral vision caught her, She silently looked at me, then chuckled self-deprecatingly, and her figure slowly disappeared into the wind. 3 days later, I received the result. Gertie woke up. Chapter 9. The one who arrived at the hospital earlier than me was Stephen. In the quiet and cold hospital room, he softly spoke to Gertie, who had a calm gaze. "I've been waiting for you, Gertie. You're finally awake." I didn't know how he found out that Gertie had awakened, and I wasn't interested in his heartfelt confession. My gaze shifted from Gertie's eyes, which had been fixed on me since she regained consciousness, and I turned to the doctor standing beside me. "When can she be discharged?" The doctor explained cautiously. "Your wife just woke up and needs to stay in the hospital for observation and rehabilitation. If there's anything urgent." I politely smiled. "There's nothing urgent, just that I want a divorce." As soon as I finished speaking, I heard a sound, crash. Gertie knocked the glass out of Stephen's hand, her eyes fixed on me with an incredulous look, her eyes red with anger. "Leon, I just woke up, and you're so eager to divorce me without even asking?" You see, she's always good at distorting the truth, turning things upside down. Clearly, she used every means to force me into a divorce, but now she blames me for wanting a divorce. Before I could say anything, Stephen called out softly, with a puzzled expression, "Gertie?" The hospital room fell silent for a moment. I calmly glanced at the shattered glass on the floor, ignoring Gertie's angry gaze. I turned around and left, leaving only one sentence. "Let me know when she's ready for discharge so we can proceed with the divorce." After that, I never visited the hospital again. However, I heard that Stephen went to the hospital every day. I don't know what he was doing there, and I don't care. But the problem is, every 2 or 3 days, I receive a phone call from the hospital, informing me about Gertie's recovery. I'm not sure if these updates are necessary for the family to know, but I don't want to know. So, when they called again, I politely declined. She's an adult and doesn't need to inform me about every detail. Unless it's about her death, don't call me again. Just before hanging up, I heard the sound of glass shattering on the other end and Stephen's exclamation. I saw Gertie again 2 months later, on a late evening. She was discharged. Since my car was at the car wash, Sally, who was working overtime with me, dropped me off at the entrance of the neighborhood. As I watched her car drive away, I heard an angry voice behind me. "Leon!" The smile on my lips froze, and I turned to look. It was Gertie. Her face was pale, and she had lost a lot of weight. The thin coat billowed in the night breeze, and the streetlight cast a long shadow of her. I stood still, unmoving, watching her approach me hastily. Then, she coldly questioned me. "It's so late. Where are you coming from?" I couldn't be bothered to respond to her. I furrowed my brow and turned to the side. If it's not about the divorce, I don't think we have anything to talk about. I had barely taken a few steps when she blocked my path. Gertie's gaze was fierce, and through gritted teeth, she said each word to me. "Leon, don't forget, we're not divorced yet." I almost immediately understood what she meant, finding it incredibly ironic. Unable to hold back, I let out a soft laugh and asked her gently, lowering my head. "Gertie, that marriage certificate didn't restrain you in the past. Do you think it can restrain me now?" Chapter 10. Stephen approached me a month after Gertie was discharged from the hospital. Since Gertie woke up from her coma, her attitude towards Stephen had done a complete 180 degrees. It was evident to the nurses at the hospital that Gertie was distant towards him. After her discharge, Gertie used the excuse of having work to avoid meeting him. However, she would show up every day outside my company and the apartment complex. She didn't want to get a divorce. So, the first thing Stephen said to me when he approached was, "Leon, is this intentional? Intentionally getting involved with another woman just to provoke Gertie, hoping she'll try to win you back." I had just come out of a restaurant, amused by his words. I held a cup of coffee in one hand and casually put the other hand in my pocket. I looked at him with lowered brows and calmly replied, "Yes, that's exactly what I intended. Leon, you." I wasn't interested in listening to his baseless accusations. I walked past him, entering the company's main gate with long strides. I turned around and saw that he was still determined to follow me, only to be stopped by the security guard. Facing the hesitant inquiry from the security guard, "Rector, who is he?" I smiled and said, "Just a random person." After that, I never saw Stephen again. However, I heard that after Gertie repeatedly ignored him, Stephen couldn't bear it any longer. He coldly told her without any concern, "Gertie, you better not regret it. I won't give you another chance." Soon after, he started dating the daughter of a vice president in their company, who had a favorable impression of him. Clearly, Stephen's harsh words had no impact on Gertie because she continued to find reasons to meet me and persistently said, "Leon, I won't get a divorce." I found it ironic and laughable. When she had tried every means to force me to divorce her, she probably never imagined that one day our roles would be reversed, and she would be the one saying those words. I even heard her softly and tenderly say to me, after a long time, "Leon, can we start over?" She said start over. She wanted me to pretend that Stephen never appeared, that she never hurt me, and that none of it ever happened. And then, without any resentment, we would be together again, loving her like before. I felt a sense of helplessness and more confusion. Finally, I gave her only one response. "Why would I marry someone like you, Gertie?" This sentence probably struck a nerve because she immediately became angry and shouted, "Then who do you want to marry? That intern?" After saying that, she asked me, "Leon, have you had enough of this nonsense?" Yes, she wanted a divorce in pursuit of true love, and me wanting a divorce was just being unreasonable. In fact, ever since I gave up on her, I hadn't lost my temper for a long time. My career was going well, I had friends by my side, and life was comfortable. It seemed like there was nothing worth getting angry about. Till this moment, my emotions were once again stirred up. Words were no longer enough to vent my frustration, so without hesitation, I raised my hand and slapped her hard. With a smack sound, silence followed. Gertie's face was pushed to the side by the force of the slap. She maintained that tilted position for a while before finally smiling lightly and saying, "I've returned the slap you owed me. Are you satisfied? I know you allowed her to get close to you only to seek revenge on me. Leon, you've achieved your goal." Chapter 11. I do not deny that I was somewhat attracted to Sally. The reason for my attraction is quite simple. One evening, I was sitting alone on a bench in the square, lost in thought, because I had been troubled by a difficult project for a long time. There were various sounds of laughter around me, colorful balloons and bubbles floating by, but none of it concerned me. It was in that scene that a teddy bear holding a balloon walked through the crowd and came to me, tying the balloon to my wrist. Then it performed a little bunny dance for me. Honestly, its dance wasn't perfect, but it still made me laugh. I leaned back slightly and teased her, saying, "Wearing a teddy bear costume and dancing like a bunny, Sally, you really have something." She took a few steps closer, took off the headpiece, revealing a rosy face with sweat-dampened hair, and her bright black eyes fixed on my face. She said, "It doesn't matter what I wear or what I dance, Leon. What matters is that you laughed." Yes, I laughed. So the reason is simple like that. She made me happy. Later, I squinted and looked at her carefully for a while, and asked her, "The teddy bear that appeared in front of me last time, that was also you, right?" It was on the night when Gertie and I had our first argument because of Stephen. I was sitting by the glass wall in the cafe, feeling melancholic, when a teddy bear approached me and performed a magic trick through the glass. At that time, Sally hadn't joined the company yet, and I didn't know who was under the headpiece. I only remember that after I silently mouthed thank you to her, she looked at me quietly for a few seconds, then slowly turned and walked into the crowd. Not long after that, I heard her introduce herself to the interns in the company. "Hello, I'm Sally." Unlike the previous time, when she danced, Sally took off the headpiece and stood in front of me. After looking at me for a while, she whispered, "Do you remember me?" I tugged at the balloon on my wrist and blinked. Of course, I remember you. Compared to the intense emotions Gertie brought me, Sally's feelings were like a refreshing glass of clean lemon water. It wasn't so exciting, and it didn't make me lose myself. It was calm and warm. Moreover, because of a failed relationship, I wasn't going to completely give up on love. It would seem too important compared to Gertie's short 4 years in my long life. So I didn't resist the attraction to Sally. After all, love is never wrong, it's the people who can be wrong. And Gertie was just a mistake I encountered on my life's journey. Once I let go, everything that followed had nothing to do with her. I wouldn't even use a sincere relationship to seek revenge on her. In response to Gertie's somewhat confident question, I simply shook my head and looked at her mockingly. "You think too highly of yourself, Gertie." Her face paled slightly the moment I finished speaking. She opened her mouth, and her voice trembled and sounded hoarse. "Leon, I know it was all my fault before. I hurt you because of my obsession. But now, I know I was wrong. I understand that the person I truly love is you, so I won't get a divorce." Facing her stubborn appearance, I smiled lightly, completely indifferent. "If that's the case, Gertie, you can also experience what it feels like when the person you love thinks of another woman day and night. The knife she once stabbed me with ultimately ended up back in her own hands." Chapter 12. Gertie said that the person she truly loves is me. To be honest, when I heard those words, my heart didn't flutter at all, and I even felt like laughing a little. If I have to pay a heavy price to make her realize who she truly loves, then this love is an insult to me. Moreover, it is based on Stephen deceiving her and abandoning her, which is what made her regretful. After that, Gertie continued to pester me for a long time. I didn't intentionally avoid her or angrily tell her to leave. Late at night, below the company building, at the entrance of the rainy neighborhood, she was willing to stand, willing to wait. After all, besides this lowly way of pestering, she couldn't interfere in my life anymore, even though we are still in a marriage relationship. When she came to me again and asked me this question, "Leon, you don't really love me that much, do you?" I didn't know what kind of mood she said this in, so I lowered my head and carefully looked at her eyebrows and eyes. I asked her, "Gertie, do you remember the summer of our second year of marriage? That summer evening with the constant sound of cicadas, while we were eating barbecue at an outdoor restaurant, we encountered a group of drunken people causing a disturbance. In the chaos, I blocked a half-broken bottle that was about to hit Gertie. The thin shirt instantly tore, and the blood flowing from the wound on my waist stained Gertie's white dress. When I woke up in the hospital ward, I saw Gertie sitting by my bedside, looking disheveled, her eyes red, and she silently held my hand, saying in a hoarse voice, 'Leon, please, stop this. I can't bear to see you hurt.' At that moment, I weakly smiled at her. 'Don't worry, it doesn't hurt that much.' Indeed, it didn't hurt much, compared to the hurt she later caused me. Memories flowed in silence, neither of us spoke, and her trembling breath was in my ears. Finally, I sighed helplessly. 'Gertie, 4 years ago, no one could compare to you in my heart.' After a long time, she seemed to struggle and spoke with a hoarse and dry voice. 'But what about now? Now, am I no longer better than her in your heart?' I looked at her seriously and shook my head. 'No, Gertie, you are no longer in my heart. Perhaps we have finally reached a dead end.' She showed a touch of desolate smile and started playing the family card. 'But Leon, you promised Grandma that we would be together.' I remained silent, feeling tired, and didn't say anything. I just opened my phone and showed her a photo, a letter left by Grandma for me. The gist of it was, if Gertie does something excessive, there's no need to have any concerns, just leave her and don't look back. I once thought that this letter would never be needed, but it turned out to be used twice. The first time, I didn't listen to the advice in time and lingered for a long time. The second time is now. I don't know when it started raining outside the window. The gloomy dusk descended, Gertie's eyes were red, and in the end, she didn't say anything, turned around, and left. Her footsteps were hurried, her figure in disarray. Chapter 13. A long time ago, I imagined that if I were forced by Gertie to divorce her, I would look at her with pain and hatred, and then say, "Gertie, I will never forgive you for the rest of my life." Now that the day has actually come, my emotions are surprisingly calm. When we met at the Civil Affairs Bureau, Gertie looked rather haggard. I heard that after getting caught in a heavy rain that day, she ended up with a high fever and had to be taken to the hospital by an ambulance. It seems that the car accident really had a significant impact on her health. When my friend told me about it over the phone, I couldn't help but smile. After effects of the car accident? Huh? Who knows how much longer she'll live? She betrayed true love by cheating within the marriage. This is what she deserves. I hired the best divorce lawyer and presented all the evidence of Gertie's affair. So, when it came to dividing the assets, I didn't give up a single penny that rightfully belonged to me. Throughout the entire process, Gertie remained silent. It wasn't until right before we parted ways that she suddenly spoke, as if asking me, but also as if talking to herself. If Stephen hadn't come back then, could we have spent our lives together? If Stephen hadn't returned, her deception towards me might have never been exposed. But she would never forget the unattainable moonlight she longed for. The longer the time passed, the more idealized that moonlight became in her heart. One day, because of a minor disagreement between us, she would start reminiscing about Stephen incessantly. And I, in the process of being silently compared to him, would become the object of her disgust. I looked up at the cloudless sky, smiled faintly, and said, "Gertie, I wouldn't have gotten caught up in this whirlpool of a love triangle if it weren't for you. It was you who, for your own selfish reasons, dragged me into it." Life after the divorce didn't change much. I went about my normal work, socializing, and occasionally took a few days off to travel after completing a project. Except for one thing, Sally and I confirmed our relationship as a couple. It was 3 months after my divorce. During a friend's birthday party, I stepped out onto the terrace to take a breath. A business partner from a project approached me and handed me a drink, politely and elegantly asking, "We talked about an old movie during our collaboration. Recently, I found the original soundtrack CD. Are you interested?" We were all adults, and the implications were self-evident. I gently tugged at the corner of my lips, about to respond with a smile when I heard a crisp voice behind her. Sorry, I was ahead in line. It was Sally. She stood there quietly, in a stunning and elegant fishtail dress, her long, jet-black hair cascading down her back. She gazed at me intently, with a gentle and radiant aura. A breeze carried a faint fragrance of unknown flowers in the night. I broke the silence first, calmly looking at the drink in the business partner's hand, and straightforwardly stated, "Sorry, I prefer lemon water." I declined the offer, and soon, the terrace was left with just Sally and me. I stood there calmly for a while, then lowered my head slightly, smiling leisurely as I asked her, "So, Sally, what movie do you want to watch?" She looked up at me, her eyes sparkling, and spoke with a particularly serious tone. "Let's go watch I Love You." Chapter 14. The interaction between Sally and me may not have had any dramatic or memorable moments, but every time I think about it, I feel surrounded by beautiful and heartwarming scenes. The warm milk she brought me in the morning, the hangover tea she made for me, the neatly ironed shirts, the perfectly tied ties, and the pork ribs on the dinner table every night, which I love so much. Sometimes, when I see her earnestly blow-drying my hair in the mirror, I can't help but recall the first evidence of her feelings for me. Perhaps it was in the same elevator, with her standing behind me, her gaze lingering on me through the mirror. A somewhat ambiguous look. Sally has a mature psychological age, she is clear-minded, independent, and exceptionally capable. In our relationship, her contributions are visibly greater than mine, and it seems like I can't give her anything except companionship. Occasionally, I would ask her if she felt it was unfair. She calmly shook her head, hugged me, and sighed with a hint of inexplicable grievance in her voice. "I just feel like you could leave at any moment." To be honest, I have been betrayed in relationships before, so even though I have developed feelings for her, I still leave a way out and don't give my complete affection. After a moment of silence, all I can say is, "It's my fault that I couldn't make you feel 100% loved. I'm sorry." Upon hearing this, she smiled as if relieved and spoke seriously. "Then I'll love you a little more to make up for the love between us." I don't know how far Sally and I will go, but when we're together, she makes me feel comfortable and happy, and that's what matters. If we're compatible, we'll stay together, if not, we'll part ways. As long as I'm comfortable. This is the lesson I learned from my failed relationship with Gertie. I saw Gertie again, in the second year after our divorce. It was at a welcome party for a friend returning from abroad. As I was walking back to the private room from the restroom, I got stuck at one end of the corridor because a crowd had gathered and blocked the passage. I stepped back from the crowd, intending to see what was happening, but I unexpectedly caught sight of Gertie, who was also trapped at the other end of the crowd, silently looking at me. Casually averting my gaze, I looked up just in time to see one of the male protagonists in the chaos, shouting and behaving like a madman. It was Stephen. Sometimes you can't help but marvel at the wonders of fate. It brought the three of us together because of an affair, and now we find ourselves crossing paths again in a similar situation. Stephen and the vice president's daughter got married shortly after they started dating, but unfortunately, she cheated on him in their second year of marriage. At that moment, I didn't know whether I should sympathize with him for repeatedly experiencing infidelity or revel in the retribution he received. But I hope that every minute of his pain, he remembers that there was someone who suffered just as much because of him. As the crowd dispersed, Gertie and I passed each other, and she suddenly called out my name. In a hoarse voice, she uttered, "I'm sorry." I stopped to look at her, unable to discern her expression. It seemed like a mix of sadness, guilt, and uncontrollable sorrow. I had no interest in pondering it and spoke calmly. "I won't forgive you, and I hope you have a miserable life." Indeed, she didn't have a good life. It was said that due to the lingering effects of a car accident, she had been seeking medical treatment abroad for years, but it was all in vain. Both her physical and mental conditions deteriorated. Upon hearing my words, she stumbled, and as Sally called out to me from a distance, she turned away from me quickly. Unexplainably, I felt that her figure seemed slightly hunched and trembling, but it was silent and unnoticed. Back home, lying in bed, too tired to speak, I absent-mindedly scrolled through Sally's phone without any purpose. She probably thought I was upset because I was reminded of the terrible past after seeing Gertie. So, she reached over and held my hand, apologizing in a gentle tone. "I'm sorry I came late." Just at that moment, I accidentally stumbled upon an old photo in her album, dated many years ago. The person in it was me. In my junior year, I had worked as an English tutor for a high school student. Her parents were divorced, and she lived with her mother. However, her mother was too busy with her career and hardly showed any affection towards her unless it was related to her studies. She needed English tutoring, but it was just a deliberate attempt to get her mother's attention by intentionally performing poorly. So, my role was more of a companion than a tutor. On the last lesson, which happened to be her birthday, not knowing her preferences, I picked an orange-flavored cake. She didn't eat much, and I thought she didn't like it. But when we were about to part ways after the lesson, she solemnly told me, "I really liked it." That student was Sally. The photo was taken by her, hiding her phone in the pages of the textbook, capturing a moment of me eating the cake. Actually, when I first saw her at the company, I recognized her. What surprised me was that not only did she secretly take a picture of me back then, but she also kept the photo for so long. My heart trembled suddenly. I didn't know what she meant by saying she came late, whether it referred to not leaving the private room earlier and leaving with me or not finding me before Gertie hurt me. But it doesn't matter. I held her hand tightly and smiled at her. It's not late, it's just right. The night breeze was cool, the moonlight was gentle, and my beloved was by my side. Everything was just right.